All right, welcome everybody to the first episode of the Invisible Museum Tour, sponsored by Royal Talents of North America. My name is Jeff Olson, and I'm the Art Education Director for Royal Talents North America, and I will not be your host today. We have a special host that will be leading this series, and I will be the guest. Isn't that fun? I get to ask the questions from behind the scenes, and I'm excited about that. If you would like to be eligible to win your own set of Rembrandt oil paints, please post an image of work of your own that was inspired by Rembrandt and include the hashtags Royal Talons NA and Zhenya's Art. That's ZhenyasArt. And we look forward to seeing what you guys have. And then we'll have one lucky winner who's going to get their own set of Rembrandt oil paints. So, for an introduction, for those of you who don't know Zhenya, Zhenya is a prominent artist. Her work is featured in private and public collections around the world, and she was selected to create iconic portraits of Bruce Springsteen and Bob Dylan for the Music Cares Grammy Foundation. She is a recipient of numerous awards, including the Alex Award in Visual Arts, presented nationally to honored scholars and artists. She's an art historian and educator. She worked for over a decade at the Getty Museum, and her scholarly work is dedicated to uncovering new perspectives regarding the life and work of old masters, including Rembrandt and Dürer. She is the co-founder of the nonprofit project AWE, on a mission dedicated to exploring connections between Western esotericism and the arts. And if that wasn't enough, folks, she is also the founder of the Z Academy, where she mentors students of all ages based on their own unique experiences and the techniques of old masters for inspiration. Join me, everyone, in welcoming Zhenya Gershman. Zhenya.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everybody who tuned in to watch and to be with us today. I want to encourage you to participate, to send us your questions during our presentation, during our experience, because we want to involve your ideas and shape what's going to happen in the next hour based on what you see and how you feel. So I'm really, really excited to introduce you to the Invisible Museum Tour. And of course, it's a play on the word because what we're trying to do is to show you more, not to show you something that's invisible, but something that would have escaped the eye if you were to pass by the gallery and maybe not notice, not even know that the meaning was there or multiplicity of meaning was there. And we want to unpack it together. We want you to look at the paintings, and hopefully in an hour you'll feel like you went through an amazing journey and you will never look at the art the same way. That's just a small goal. I want to thank very quickly my father, who had asked me so many times to do this program, and I kept refusing, but I couldn't refuse anymore, so I said I'm going to do it. So Papa, I know you're watching. This is for you. And there's no better time than to do it now while we are somewhat isolated. Most museums are closed, and we want to, I'm sure the museums would be excited as well, to open the doors. The advantage is that we could fly from Los Angeles to London in a matter of seconds through this PowerPoint, so we can go to multiple museums at the same time for free. So thank you, Royal Talents, for sponsoring this journey.
Absolutely.
I also want to say that there's no better artist than to start from, that the one that you all know so intimately. Why do you know him so intimately? Because you know him by his first name. Very few people live to have that 400 years later after they died, that you can simply say, Rembrandt, and we all know exactly which Rembrandt we're talking about. So I figured that we will start with our old friend for anybody who's watching this program, including my kid who is 12 years old, Nika. She's known Rembrandt before she was even born, because at the time I was working at the Getty Museum and she was in my belly, in the very same room that I'm going to take you in today. I also thought we'd start, I want to introduce the Getty Museum here in Los Angeles, in my hometown, where I worked for so many years, and I knew it better than my house. So I just want to say, welcome to my house, right? In fact, you're sitting in my studio where I teach. You can see some of my paintings, but the Getty felt more of my home. So without much ado, let's go on our journey. I'm going to start a PowerPoint, so our faces will diminish, but the great art will appear. Are you ready, Jeff?
I'm absolutely ready. Excited.
Okay. In.
Awesome.
And just a little bit of advertisement there. You can see my students drawing in the very gallery that we're about to go to. You noticed a little portrait in the slide. That's what we're going to focus in just a moment, and they're all trying to become Rembrandt. So this is very exciting. When the museum opens, let's do it in real person. And I wanted to start today by introducing you with the words of an artist, and not just my words, but the words of an incredible artist. And I want to end our tour experience today with the words of the artist as well. We'll start with somebody who lived many years after Rembrandt, and we'll end by somebody who lived many years before Rembrandt. So let's experience this. And here are the words by Van Gogh, who actually went to see Rembrandt in the Rijksmuseum in 1885. And he said, "Would you believe it? And I honestly mean what I say. I should be happy to give 10 years of my life if I could go on sitting here in front of this picture," he was referring to the Jewish bride, "for a fortnight with only a crust of dry bread for food." So I'm not going to expect you to do this. Nobody has to give 10 years of their life to watch this program. But you can, these powerful words, what did he mean? What did he see in the Jewish bride? What did he see in the Rembrandt's painting that he was so moved that he felt that even the prison ratio of a little dry crust of bread would be a blessing to just be able to see and watch it. And that is what I want to explore with you in the next hour. And I give you here a close-up of the Jewish bride, one of my personal favorite paintings as well. And the close-up I chose is the groom putting his hand on the heart of his future wife, and she reciprocating the gesture. And somehow we feel the heartbeat coming through time to our room, under our hands, pulsating, and bringing that commitment of love through the centuries. So I wanted to start with this place of love, this place of what is it there in Rembrandt that is so amazing.
I love the idea, Zhenya, that we, like Van Gogh, even though separated by more than 100 years, can have the same experience, right? You can sit in front of a painting just as he did, almost sharing time with him and appreciating that work of art. It's such a wonderful thought.
Absolutely. And now with the technology, we can close in so closely. Of course, being there in person is so special, but having to see these details that are hard to see in the museum is also a great treat. So I bring to you a painting from the room in the Getty Museum. The reason I went to work there was to have that room to myself. Every morning when I would come in, before it was open to public, the security officers became my best friends, and they'd let me in, and I'd stare, and I'd savor. This was my coffee, this was my breakfast, and I would do the same almost every day before I went home when the museum was closed to public, say goodbye to these portraits. So these are my old friends. And in this room, you find paintings by Rembrandt, by his students, by his teacher, by his friends, and by his enemies. So we call it Rembrandt and his circle, this amazing experience at a glance. And we're introduced with the portrait of this man that we're going to explore together. And the very first thing that we can clearly say, one thing that is so obvious about Rembrandt, is that he's really a painter of light. And I know it's kind of a cliche, but when we go back to Rembrandt, we realize that it's not, that it's extremely profound. And in fact, if you happen to have a Rembrandt painting at home, make sure you don't frame it with a gold frame. It's considered extremely rude because the gold detracts from the light that he creates within the painting, the gold that he creates in the painting. So frame it in a dark black, beautiful frame like the museums do. A tip, right? Just in case, you never know. So I wanted to tell you also, when we look at this magnificent work, imagine that he was only 25 when he made it. So Jeff and I are both artists, and I'm sure, Jeff, I don't know about you, but I get really upset and jealous that he was that good, that young. And the year that it's painted, 1631, is a significant year for Rembrandt's career because he was not born in Amsterdam. He was born in Leiden. And he came to Amsterdam to take the city by storm. He really wanted, his dream was to become the best artist, and he's starting to create portraits. When we calculate his speed for the amount of portraits he made, probably one a week. I mean, it's really, he's painting very fast for these nearly photorealistic images. We know how long it takes to make them. He's a workaholic. He really wants to impress. So that is in the back of our minds. He really, like every great artist at the time, potentially great artist of the time, was advised to go to Italy. This was expected of any artist outside of Italy, to go on that journey and to learn from the greatest masters of the time and to bring it back to their country and make it their own. It is, there's an anecdote that Rembrandt said this. I'm sure he did not, but this is repeated, and it kind of makes sense with his career, that Rembrandt does not have to go to Italy. Italy will come to Rembrandt. And that was such a case. As we go, who his teacher was. It's funny to think that Rembrandt had a teacher, right? It looks like he just fell from the sky, but he did have a teacher. And I put a question mark here for the title of this painting because I want to come back to it together. So this is a painting in the same room. It's actually quite small. I could probably show it to you with my hands. It would fit. It's like a computer screen, only vertical. And this is made by Peter Lassmann. Now, how many of you heard of Peter Lassmann? Have you heard of Peter Lassmann?
I have not heard of Peter.
Okay, so I'm sorry, Peter Lassmann. I feel always embarrassed to say this, but he was the name of the day. If you wanted to become great, if you didn't go to his studio, you'd have tougher luck, right? He was like the master to study from. And it was Peter Lassmann who went to Italy and brought the Caravaggio light back with him. This is where Rembrandt gets his lighting. So I want to show it to you side by side, and it'll become apparent to you. We call it chiaroscuro, the division, the very strong light division, usually at a diagonal between light and dark. You could see it in the Lassmann going across the painting, right? From the top right corner to the bottom left corner. All the faces are also divided in half, and you could see the same lighting occurring in Rembrandt's portrait. There's only one problem. He's much better than the teacher. So this is this is a question that I have in my mind. Who are they going to remember, my students or me? The old teachers, I'm sure, ask that question. Hopefully both. But it's always, I feel a little bit embarrassed to say that, because Lassmann was so famous. He was particularly famous at the time for painting historical paintings, bringing these religious and grand subjects to the Dutchmen. Now, I want to also point out that the light is coming. Can you notice what direction, Jeff, the light is coming from?
For which image?
Both.
Both. It looks like it's coming from the upper left.
Exactly. And if you look at almost every painting from this time period, it will always come from upper left. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it? Because they look so different, right? We almost don't notice it, but this is a formula that the artists are using. And there is a religious aspect to it, why they're doing this. We have it even in our language when we say right-handed, right is correct. You're right, Jeff, you're right? Right, correct. Mm-hmm. Left is in Latin sinister, sinister, dark, devilish, right? It was considered that the god was always coming from the right, the correct side, and the demon, the devilish, was coming from the left. So divine light has to always emanate from the upper left corner. Now upper right corner. Here it's on the left. So you would say, Zhenya, how does this make sense? It's coming from the left when you said it should come from the right. It's their right. So if you turn around into position of the portrait, into the position of Christ, the light is coming from the right, not the left. That's a position of the one who's painted. So it's very, very interesting. Most people don't realize it, but once we see it, it'll become very obvious to you. So here I wanted to come a little bit closer to this man, and you'll notice that Rembrandt dropped the details in the background. Really, there's just a gray background, right? And he dropped most of the props. There's no hands. He's not holding anything. So what he's trying to do, almost like a saint, He's creating this metal plate and the hat to frame the face, so we would be directed by the light and by all of these details and textures onto the face of this man and ask a question. And the question we want to ask is, who is he? Why am I looking at him? What does he do? So I wanted to ask our audience, and I want to ask you, Jeff, 3 things. If you had to describe this man, 3 words that you would use to describe him. I'm going to write it down so we can come back to it. So for our audience, but we'll start with Jeff while you're sending your answers.
Sure, sure. Well, I'd say that he looks very determined. I also feel like he has a strong resolve. So whatever he's looking at or whatever he's thinking about, he's very resolved in his mission. And then I also think he looks, he looks alert. He's not passive. He's alerted in almost a sense of readiness.
And ready. So these are amazing observations. So determined, resolved, and ready. If I had to think about how Rembrandt felt when he came to Amsterdam, this would be probably the 3 words I would describe him, right? So determined, resolved, and ready to take the city by storm, to go into the military battle of art, right? I wonder if we get any words as we keep going. I'm not going to tell you the identity just yet. I want to hear from the others. So we'll keep moving a little bit more, and if we get some words, we'll include them.
I've got questioning, confident are a couple.
Confident and questioning. I love this. Why do I love questioning? Because we just said we want to ask him a question, who are you? But it feels like the painting is also asking us a question, well, who are you? And this is only the best art does that. Only the best art asks us a question back, asks us to realize who are we, what are we doing here, what is our purpose, right? Are we determined? It throws right back at you, and I strongly feel with all of Rembrandt's words. So so I want to thank for that. We'll keep going for just a moment. So I wanted to come in, since we're talking about light, and we touched upon the idea of gold as well, with a golden frame. I want to show you that Rembrandt was an incredible inventor, and he was an incredible rebel. He came to art very late in his career at the age of 13. So at the time, I say that with a joke, but it's true. At the time, if you were talented, you start learning at age of 5 or 6. So by the time he comes to his first teacher in his native city of Leiden, he's behind. And he's so determined, so driven, he's always looking for shortcuts. He's always looking for inventions. And therefore, it makes him the genius that he is, because he both takes up the tradition, but he also tries to make up the lost time and find shortcuts his own way. So I attract your attention. Can you see my little mouse here?
Yep.
To the golden ribbon. And if you stood in front of this painting in real life, I wonder if it feels gold to you here, but if you actually stood in front of the real painting, it looks like gold. It's many people ask me if he used gold, when I stand there in the gallery, if he actually used gold paint. So what did Rembrandt do? What was his big invention? He actually was not interested just in light. He was interested in optics. And he understood that the physical law of thin versus thick, and that when light reflects over thin passages of paint, it penetrates it and it feels distant. But if light hits a thicker painted passage of paint, what they called impasto, like pasta, paste, thick, light will return back to your eye faster and will appear three-dimensional. So in this little gold passage of paint, he is actually gobbling up the paint with his brush. He's molding and painting with just white. He's letting the white to be almost like a sculptural tool. He lets it dry for a couple of weeks, and then he comes in with thin glazes, washed down layers of paint of yellow and ochre, and then rubs it off to let the white come through, and it becomes like gold. You can actually try it at home. It's an amazing technique. Even if you're not a painter, if you buy 2 paints of tube, white and yellow or white, yellow, and ochre, this will work. It's really exciting. The other thing that I How does that sound, Jeff, by the way?
That sounds fantastic. And yeah, it's a wonderful technique.
Um, this is a little bit shy. He's doing it in one area of the painting. We will see how unshy he gets towards the end of his life with the use of impasto, with the use of experimentation. So put it in the back of your mind. Now, I told you it's about light. I told you that he is a genius. Science and art weren't as divided as they are today, and most artists were incredible scientists. So how is he a scientist here? Not only in figuring out how the light works, he's even figured out, to my knowledge, first, if not one of the first, how the pupil works, how the eye, how the vision works. So now I want you to concentrate on the two eyes. This is the reason I brought up this detail. And I want you to concentrate on the eye on the left in the light and the eye on the other side in the darkness. So the pupils are actually reacting to the amount of light penetrating them. The one on the left is contracting into a little black dot. The one on the right is expanding into a larger pupil to receive more light, like a shutter of a camera lens. It is unheard of for a painter to have that kind of amount of detail and understanding. To give you perspective, the understanding, description, scientific description of how the eyes work didn't come for at least 3 centuries later. Now,
Incredible powers of observation, right? Just really see how the world.
I think it's easier. Sometimes I feel it's a little bit easier to look at the real person than Rembrandt's paintings, because when you start to follow his light logic and his amount of observation, as you said, it gets me dizzy. I cannot believe a human mind. It's beyond computer. It's beyond the depth of his observation is really something superhuman, right? It's when you watch incredible gymnasts make backflips and you know that you would break and it's not humanly possible. That's what I feel with Rembrandt's paintings. And it's not in the sense of realism. We will discover that it's not making it photoreal. It's that power of observation, that honesty, that profundity of the gaze that we're going to see over and over again. So here I bring up Rembrandt's signature. It's at the top right of this painting, and it's proudly signed. Many of you know this signature. It's become quite famous. And again, here you see that by this time he dropped his last name. Sometimes he even referred to his city where he was born by using the letter L next to his initials. And he reduced it to his first name. I want to share with you something exciting, something that I discovered by my love of Rembrandt, and that is he added a mysterious letter to his name. If you read his name, the very next to last letter is a letter D. And you'll say, well, Zhenya, how could you be possibly so excited about it? It's because his name did not have that letter. It was simply written as Rembrandt, which would be pronounced either way. It's identical pronunciation if you add the D or take it away. But by adding it, he changed and gave a radiant meaning to his name. His name became actually a carrier of a message. And you'll notice that he divided his name in two parts, Rem, and then he capitalizes the B. In so many of his signatures, he'll actually put a little the space between Rem and Brandt to really emphasize that it's put together out of the meaning of two words joining together. So if you go to the Dutch dictionary from 1600s and look up, which I was lucky we had a copy at the Getty at the time when I was working there, and if you look up the significance of the meaning of these two words, it kind of gives me chills. Rem stands for dim, dimming, bringing the darkness, and Brandt, bright, bright light, burning fire. So the two literally mean light and dark, or dark and light, chiaroscuro, right? So he not only is painting the light, he's not only observing the light, he's not only observing how the eye is observing the light, but he becomes identified. I am the carrier of the light and dark. Of course, you need the dark to bring out the light, right? So I am chiaroscuro. Nice to meet you, right?
Brilliant.
Okay, so we'll keep going. I bring you to the detail of how he painted the metal plate, that breastplate, and it is so stunning because it actually feels cold. Every time I stand to it, I want to touch it. I know make the security officers very uneasy in the museum because I get so close, and I really want to. Maybe it is metal, right? It just feels like my mind cannot accept that this oil paint. But when we get even a little bit closer, we'll notice that he's painting rather loosely. If we focus on one of these buttons, you could see that he's just scumbling a little bit of white, and it's really. And here he's taking a brush that splits the hair, and he dips it into multiple colors of different grays, and he just drags it, dry brushes it in the direction of the metal plate to create a kind of a metallic sheen. Really incredible freedom in experimentation again. But one thing that I wanted to attract your attention to, that this probably a military man, wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
Right, we have that determination, that resolve, that mission, that confidence comes from that almost that military stance. We notice an interesting detail as we come closer. First, even before that, we notice that the feather was coming under the golden ribbon, almost like a theater play where you just say, I need a hat, and you just stick the feather behind. And here we find a curious detail. We see his kind of a dirty, long underwear. This would be undershirt that would go into the pants, tucked under the metal plate. So if you take off that metal plate, it seems very pedestrian outfit and feels that he's been wearing it for a long time and nothing glorious about it. I want to reveal to you that this is a painting of an old man in military costume. So Rembrandt has played a trick on you and on his patrons because he's brand new in Amsterdam. He doesn't have his commissions just yet. So he's painting people in costumes to say, if you are a military man, come and you look like this. In reality, this man is a model. We know that because he appears in many of Rembrandt's paintings, and we'll see that in just a moment, but also in his colleagues' paintings. So he's a shared model of the time. I know I have my favorite model, Mark Snyder. I always have to put a shout out to him. He's watching right now. So it's nice when the model is identified. I wish we had his name. This type of painting in Netherlands at the time, in 1600s, was actually common. It was called, there was a name for it, a troonie, which is kind of like a little joke. That the artist is pulling one on you. You believe one thing, and they're actually revealing another thing. So it's a very playful attitude. I wanted to show you one more thing, if I may, about this portrait. I always say, if this man walked away from the painting, if this troonie, this joke, this model walked away, and all that was left was that boring gray background, I would still give anything to buy this painting. So I want to show you what I mean. Oh, very quickly before that, I forgot that I inserted this. This is a portrait of Unknown Man, which is housed at Art Institute of Chicago, painted in the same year, 1631. And if we flew very quickly to Maurice's house in The Hague, here's another troonie of another old man from 1631. And here's our fellow. What do you say? Is it a different person or the same person?
Oh, they're definitely the same person, aren't they?
Yeah, you could see that he's just changing the hats. He's just changing the outfits. So playful, right? Any kind of aristocrat can come into my studio. I'll paint you however you want. Okay, so back to what I was building up to. The man had walked away, and all is left in my Photoshop is the wall. And what I wanted to prove to you in my rough sketch, please forgive me for my cloning device, is that the wall there is not just gray. Just the wall itself is a symphony of light. And I always tell my students that when you paint the background, you kind of have to think about it. If the person can't walk into the room if the room doesn't exist, the background is almost more important than the subject. You have to create the environment that could be receptive for the portrait. And that's what Rembrandt is doing. He's created a divine environment for his portrait. Look at that streaming light. Look at the gradations, the symphony of grays. I mean, I could stare like Van Gogh just at this background without the portrait for a fortnight, but hopefully with the ice cream and not the Dry bread.
Crust of bread.
Crust of bread. I hope that I convinced you. Jeff, what do you think about this beauty?
Yes, it's wonderful, and the nuance, the sensitivity is just I'm so envious of it for sure.
Yeah, this is what I want. I want to infest you, everybody who's watching, with deep jealousy to Rembrandt. We hate him and we love him. um, so I want to show you what's truly invisible. I know we called it the Invisible Museum Tour. There are parts of the paintings that are invisible to our eye, but thankfully to incredible technology, the Getty Museum, I have to give them a shout out, has one of the best conservation lab in the world, and they actually go out and train other museums how to preserve their work, conserve their work. It's really, really incredible. So with this new technology, they were able to create an X-ray, a particular type of X-ray of this painting, and this is what they saw, and I just wanted to share it with you. It looks extremely odd, and if you want to have a cool word at dinner party to show off, what they saw is pentimenti. Many changes of mind that the artist made that are coming through the layers of paint. And you'll notice that these pentimenti are very visible to the right of the face, which made the conservators and curators very suspicious, because we know if he wanted to shift the eye or the nose, he wouldn't be shifting it that much. I mean, this is a central portrait. So they asked themselves the question, what is Rembrandt thinking about? Until they turned this panel, this photograph, upside down, and this is what they got. So clearly you begin seeing a beautiful portrait, what we think is actually a self-portrait underneath the portrait of an old man. Yet two in one, right? So what is Rembrandt thinking? He's very impatient. He got an idea. He's out of prepared canvases. He's just going to grab any panel that he sees. Oh, I have some study of my self-portrait. I'll just paint right over it. He's so generous. He's so experimental that he turns it upside down, puts his layer of paint as a background, and puts the painting right on top. I just find, I mean, so many artists that I know are so careful and attached to the work. This level of generosity for the mission. I want to experiment. I want to do something new. I could do another self-portrait, no problem, right? It puts his personality in a very different way as we see this. Speaking of the self-portraits, there is one of his first self-portraits hanging in the same room at the Getty. And this little guy is 8 inches by 6 inches, right? A tiny little portrait, which has so much power. It's like a little Napoleon in the gallery, all these big paintings, and this little guy is making you walk up close to him. And when you walk up close to him, you get insulted, because what you do is not what you see, is what you hear. This is one of the few talking paintings I know. And what you hear is deep laughter, not just smile, not just offensive, loud laughter, and you like a nose away to see this painting. So it is a mind-boggling experience. So he's so young, 1628. He is 22 years old.
So much confidence. So much confidence.
So much confidence.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you notice one detail here, Jeff. He's wearing the same costume.
Yeah, the same prop. Look at that.
Right? So we know that Rembrandt was obsessive in collecting props, and in so many paintings his characters share them. We see it painting to painting. So you can see how he's using it. He loves painting metal. He wants to experiment with this, but he's full of joy. If you can't laugh with Rembrandt, you missed Rembrandt. Rembrandt uses so much sarcasm and humor in his art that you can't be too serious. It's like when we hear of classical music, we think that we have to put on a face, right? Rembrandt says, no, we have to have the ability to laugh. And in these tough times now with COVID, we know that jokes and humor is what's saving us, right? So this is Rembrandt really thinking at his best. You know, let's laugh. Laugh at you, laugh at me, laugh at us. Let's laugh together. A remarkable painting. Now, if you notice in my little tag there, it's an oil painting on copper.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that.
So that's really, thank you, Jeff. You asked the telepathically. It registered. It's so interesting. It was one of the few mediums that you had an option to paint with, but copper plates were very expensive, and so hence a smaller size. The allure of painting of copper, that it is a metallic surface that gets polished mirror-like. So when you put the paint on it, it's almost like, it becomes like lacquer. It becomes really reflective, really polished. You could see all the changes, every brushstroke that you put on it. And it gives a different texture, that canvas that's more absorbent, or wood panel even, which is harder, but still nowhere near to the polish of metal. But what I wanted to share with you, why copper is so expensive, important, I wanted to say, important to Rembrandt. One of the big experimentation area for Rembrandt was etchings, was engravings and etchings. And he used metal plates to create his prints. He basically defined modern printing techniques. The man he was inspired by was Albrecht Dürer in Germany, but Rembrandt, 100 years later, takes the technique to even further heights. But remember, etching or engraving is done with a needle point, sharp needle point into the metal. And if you make a mistake, it's visible. So you have to, usually the process is the artist works out the drawing, and then they even will source it out to an engraver who has the mastery, almost like a jeweler, to put those precise lines. Not Rembrandt. First of all, he has his own printing press in his home. And second of all, he does not even prepare. We know that sometimes, when you have life model on a stand, and he taught his students, right? Just like it's done today, he takes, instead of paper, his copper plate and his needle point, and he just sketches with the needle point into the printing plate with 1,000 mistakes and prints that as a finished work. A real rebel, laughing at the tradition, laughing.
It makes me wonder, Zhenya, too, if it isn't the same example of a spontaneity as in the previous painting where he worked over an old painting, that maybe this copper plate was just what was available in his studio, and the value of it was less important than his desire to get this painting out into the world.
I 100% agree with you. And I was trying to get the slide, but I didn't get it in time for you. I know the Getty has it in the conservation department. If we turned around the portrait of an old man in a military costume, he actually painted it on the top of a crate where the shipment came into his studio. And there's stamps, like, when we get the UPS, and I get UPS shipment every day now that we don't shop in the stores, with all the stamps of this box. And he just says, I don't have a nice panel. I'll just gesso that, right? So definitely I'll paint on anything. Just let me paint, right? Yep. Incredible. Yep. You hear him, let me paint. Okay. What do we got? I wanted to show you a comparison very quickly between two brackets. One of the very first, if not the first self-portrait that we know of him in the left, and one of the very last self-portraits that he made of himself before he died. And in both portraits, he is laughing.
Yes.
A very different laugh. In the first one, he's in the beginning of his life, watching and daring his patrons and his fate and his future, and says, bring it on. In the end, he's laughing at what's to come as well, but that's death. And he's laughing in the face of death. He seems so knowledgeable. He understands so much that everything that meant to him in the beginning has a different meaning now. And there's a curious, nobody knows what that figure is that's standing to his left, but it's almost like there's many speculations, but nobody knows for sure. And he has his mole stick. That's the stick that you hold so that your other hand will not shake when you paint. And with it, he kind of taps on his heart, on his stomach, like almost like tapping in the face of death. Like, I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of anything. Laughter is all I've got. Right? Amazing. I just wanted to put these brackets of his career for you.
We have a comment on that last painting that the light source has changed. Rather than coming from that upper left, it's almost coming from directly above him.
Who said that comment? Do we know?
We don't have a name for that, but
Okay.
very observant.
Whoever, the anonymous, the invisible person for the invisible tour who said that, it is so interesting. And I'd like to add to that, but please stay tuned because I'm going to use your comment in a little bit and we're going to add a little bit more. This is a brilliant observation. You're right. Everything changed for Rembrandt, even the light source. And please don't let me forget. I will talk when we get to a later painting in a moment. Oh, the other way. Okay. In the same room, I just wanted to briefly show you that we have actually a painting by Rembrandt's student. And Rembrandt was not only just famous for being a painter, he had about 30 students throughout his life, and most of them were extremely brilliant, but this was his first. And his first student was even before he got to Amsterdam, when he himself was barely coming out of his teenage years, and he set up his first studio in his city of birth, Leiden, and his first student was Gerrit Douw, and he was only 14 when he entered Rembrandt's studio. This is more of a mature work by Douw, but I wanted to show you how Rembrandt's talent touched him, this precision of light. But something happened. Each student brought in their own talent and expanded on Rembrandt's ideas to their own ability. And Douw did it the most beautiful way. Here he paints not a day scene, but a night scene. And we actually not only see a candlelight, but we actually see the moonlight. You'll notice that this is an astronomer, and he opened the window and he revealed the source of the moonlight, and there's a little liquid. Can you see it on the screen?
Yes.
A little liquid bottle. I'm going to move the photograph of us so I could point it out with my cursor. And what he's doing with this alchemical liquid, he is letting it sit and settle with the moonlight. Is going to help it with the chemical reaction to achieve its transformation. Such an amazing little painting. It's only 12 by 8 inches. It's a tiny little miniature. So Rembrandt's bravura on the grand scale is now finding itself in the hands of Douw, who is a very different sensibility, a miniature artist. And, let's see, just move this really quickly. I'm going to try to show you a detail. Why did it not go? This is a detail. This is something that Rembrandt would not do. Vermeer likes to do this. For instance, you can almost see all of the constellation in the celestial globe. Rembrandt would not be interested in that type of detail, right? He's interested in the emotional sense of detail. But you could see again from the student taking it from the master and taking it to a different direction. Amazing painting. Please go see it if you can when the museum is open. Okay, let's go up this way. So I'm about to introduce to you one of my favorite paintings in the whole world, and it hangs in the same room. And what I have to tell you about it, I'm not going to tell you its title for a while, but it's 30 years apart from the painting on its left. So 1631 on the left, 1661 about on the right. And I want to give you just a moment to take it in. There's a lot that happened in 30 years, technically, psychologically, biographically, and I want to see if there are 3 things, again, that jump out to you. I'm going to start with Jeff, but if our audience can type it and send us their observations, I would be so grateful. 3 things that you see that are remarkably different between these 2 paintings.
Well, the first is the texture, the level of impasto on the face, and specifically bringing your attention to that area because the edges of the painting are much flatter and smoother and roughed, but he really labors on the face and the thickness of the paint. It's fantastic.
And this would be so much more apparent if you actually stood in the real gallery. And I will show a close-up in a moment that everybody could see what Jeff is referring to. Particular in the forehead, we see this incredible layer of paint, almost Van Gogh-like.
Mm-hmm. When the brushwork throughout the painting is much looser, especially at the edges. You really get that sense of what you're saying earlier about him not being as interested in detail. He focuses you by leaving there a little bit of ambiguity at the edges and to move towards those areas where your eye hits the contrast of the texture.
So true. There's a kind of a vignette that focuses you in the center of this painting. So true in so many ways that he achieves this. Anything from our viewers, or one more thing from you, Jeff?
Well, we've got a comment here from Michael. He says about the look of it, he looks doubtful. There's not the same confidence.
I'm so grateful for that, because we're starting to meet this new person. And definitely, I would ask Michael and everybody else who felt the same way, where do we find this doubt? How can we say that about an oil painting? Where does it come from? What's the clue?
Well, certainly the eyes, the expression.
So that's another major difference. Look at how on the left, he's averting our gaze. On the right, he might not be communicating directly. We'll explore that if he is or he isn't, but he's facing straight on to us.
Straight on, yeah. There's a sense of resignation in the eyes here, right?
Okay,
Not
if anybody sends us any other ideas, I'd love to hear from our audience. Okay, so focus on this painting a little bit more.
somebody
You
commented
see,
the way he's holding his head with his hand.
yes, thank you so much. And I have to encourage you by saying sometimes the most obvious thing in art is the most profound. And this is what we're sometimes afraid. We're afraid to say something obvious, but this is where the entry point to this painting is. How he holds his hand. Remember, in the previous painting, there were no gestures. Here, the hands are almost more important than the face. When I look at it, it reminds me of the famous, many years later, Rodin's sculpture that everybody knows, The Thinker. It gives a kind of a thoughtfulness to this gesture, right? Okay, so I want to go in a little bit closer. So it's a large painting. I wanted you to see that it's 34 inches by 30 inches, so it's quite a large painting now. It's basically life size. So when we encounter him in the gallery, it feels almost uncomfortable because it's like another human being. And he's asking you again, what is he asking you? What's going to happen to me? Should I not? Right? It's very active. And then we get to this detail. And I know that all of you noticed that the one prop is not fabulous. It's not something incredible. It's a very simple prop of a knife. So my question to everybody, I want you to take a moment to think about it. What comes to mind when you see this knife? You don't have to be an art historian. You don't have to be an expert. You, expert in human relationship, right there in your rooms, in front of your screen, what does it make you feel? How does it make you feel? Is it dangerous? Is it, what does it mean? What does it evoke? I want to hear from as many people as possible, and we'll start with Jeff because while we wait for the comments.
Well, it doesn't feel like he's threatening us, but he certainly has a tight grip on it, right? There's this intensity that it adds to the painting.
One thing I realized that you can't experience here, but you would in real person, he painted it right on the edge of the frame. So when you said he's not really threatening us, while he's not really threatening us, he's sharing almost an object in space. By resting his hand on the frame we can touch, and he is touching, it makes it so close to us. So in some sense, it's just threatening just because of its proximity. Nothing of the frame before was coming out towards us in such a way. I also want to attract your attention while people are texting us their comments. To the stroke, the way he painted the knife, probably in 3 strokes, you could see them with a little edge of a thinner brush at the very edge, putting the sharpness, but one thick brush just brushing through it. You could see 1, 2, 3, less than 30 seconds, this knife is painted. An incredible economy of means. Do we have any comments?
Some fun comments. So somebody says that he feels sad that he may want to hurt himself, that there's a call for help. that he wants people to feel his pain. He's debating on putting the knife in, pointing to his heart,
Oh,
so pointing towards himself. So it's definitely in reference to his fate or future.
incredible, powerful observations. And what that means to me is not just that these were brilliant and wonderful, but the painting was able, SOS, send a message in the bottle through time, through this computer, through this electronic device, through Facebook, using us and saying, help me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Something
There's another great
terrible is about
comment
to
here. I thought
happen.
this too. Yeah, I thought this too, this comment that's coming up there. Say it's a common knife, a utilitarian knife. It's not a military knife. So it speaks to some type of tradesman.
Incredible.
Right, right.
Incredible. So I have to tell you, I put a question mark here to his identity, to the title of this painting. In the museum, if we were standing there, I would bring a Post-it and I would cover up the title the same way because I wanted you to experience this before you read the information. It was very important to me. I wanted to honor Rembrandt that way. I want him to communicate because, of course, in the time of Rembrandt, there were no really museums or labels.
There's another brilliant comment, and
Yes.
see, it's not fair because I know what the painting is, but this person says it's like Abraham doubting his sacrifice of Isaac, and I think when they find the title to this, it's that same kind of questioning of their fate. Yeah.
The most human moment when you know you ought to accept your fate,
You
but
know
you
your
don't
fate.
really, but you don't know why. So you can't reconcile what you have to do with what your mind, what your heart understands, but your mind cannot catch up with, right? That's what this painting is about. It's incredible. So this painting went through an interesting fate. It kept changing labels. So throughout the 400 years of its travels, from 1661 to now, it was called many different things, and the questions, the reasons, was the same as ours. Somebody said that this is painted towards the end of Rembrandt's life, and maybe this was a doctor visiting him, and that knife was a surgeon's knife, which I hope that you have better doctors than that when I hear that. So it was called a doctor at some point, and then it was also called an assassin because it seemed so menacing to others. It was also called a cook at some point because they thought, well, it's a I can't say it, utilitarian knife. So it must be a cook, he's poor, it's somebody in the neighborhood. All of these titles have been brushed off and retitled finally as Saint Bartholomew. So this comes kind of as a shock for a moment because there seems to be nothing saintly about this image. It doesn't seem to have a halo, golden robe, dignity, white beard, all those wonderful things that we're used to seeing in the saint's portraits. But who was Saint Bartholomew? So very quickly, we know him from many paintings, but here is from Michelangelo, from the Last Judgment. And this is in the Sistine Chapel. And here, really the one prop that identifies him is holding the knife. Now, both the man who's painting holding the knife and the skin that he's holding is the same person. The fate of Saint Bartholomew was to be skinned alive for his belief in Christianity. So he did not denounce his belief in Christ, and for that, by the Romans, he was skinned alive. And how do the artists paint him? They paint him like it's not a big deal. He holds his skin in the other hand and says, mind over matter. You can take my skin away, but I will still stand for what I believe in. And we see many of these images. It must have particularly struck the artists somehow. You know, we get ostracized a lot. We get misunderstood a lot. So I think this particular saint, though it's not an art saint, spoke to the artists. I want to show you this frame.
I painted a version of that painting. I'll have to share it with you sometime, Zhenya.
Please tag Zhenya's art. Let's put you in the contest. Okay, here's another version, a more acceptable version from 1657 by Rembrandt himself. He keeps returning to the subject, so I wanted you to see it. It's much more clear here with a knife, and the saint is looking away. It makes a little bit more sense. We could see it. It's a little bit more obvious. But our saint, this version, the one at the Getty from 1661, is unlike that we've ever seen before in art history. And here with a close-up, you begin to see his amazing mastery. Having talked about the skin and how he was skinned alive, note that the way that the hand is painted almost feels like a glove, like you could take it off, right? And then, as Jeff brilliantly observed, so now I could say it's Saint Bartholomew. I'm going to skip this real quick and show you one thing. As Jeff brilliantly observed, when we go closer to this portrait, we could see incredible level of impasto, that thick, juicy paint. And now we come back to the quote by Rembrandt when he said, I could sit 2 weeks without anything and watch this. Can't you see the entire Van Gogh's quote. Can't you see the entire Van Gogh's career in that forehead?
Yeah.
Next week, maybe, or sometime, not next week, but next time when we see each other, we might look at Van Gogh together, and we'll recall what he was looking at, and you will actually see how he makes the entire landscape out of that forehead. When we get closer, from far away, we'd think that Rembrandt used earth tones. But up close, we could see reds and blues and red lakes, an incredible, incredible combination of colors that he weaves into that texture. Absolutely remarkable. I wanted to just flash back to the previous slide and to give you a little bit of biographical context. Why, perhaps, I want to ask a question to Rembrandt. Why did you paint Saint Bartholomew this way? And if we try to understand what happened to him up till this point, not that biography has to explain everything about the artist, but I think it makes the painting more meaningful to us as well. He had lost so much. He had lost his beloved wife, Saskia. And here I show you her portrait on the left. This is a portrait from Washington, D.C. If any of you are in Washington, this is your treasure. He had also lost an incredible house. He was once very popular and made so much money that I joked that he bought a house in Beverly Hills, right? This was the prestigious quarters in Amsterdam, and he bought this incredible home that he ended up losing and becoming bankrupt. Everything from this home was sold. In fact, it's ironic that the reason we know so much about Rembrandt is from that bankruptcy sale, and everything was inventory. That inventory is preserved, so we know what was in the house. So we're excited, our historians are excited to know this, but the context of that knowledge is painful. I'd rather we didn't know that information. So he loses this house. He's forced to sell everything, and he moves to very poor quarters. And a few years after his wife died, he also became in love with a woman that brought joy to the rest of his life, and her name was Hendriki Stoffels. He never was able to marry her for some legal issues, but she actually gave him a birth of a beautiful girl. Saskia gave birth to 4 children. 3 children died. 3 daughters died. Only Titus, his beloved son, remains alive at this point for Rembrandt from Saskia, and his girl from Hendriki. That too is going to pass. The portrait of Saint Bartholomew is painted in 1661. Shortly after it's painted, plague comes through Europe and will take both his last common law wife, Hendriki, and his beloved son, Titus. Very soon, he too will, in 1669, he too will die, and he was so poor that he was actually buried in a rented grave. So I looked up, I wasn't familiar with what rented grave means. Rented grave means that he was buried in a church in Amsterdam for 20 years. And after 20 years, he was exhumed and burned and destroyed and thrown away. Such fate was awaiting Rembrandt and already was on its way when he paints this portrait. And though this is no by any means a self-portrait, this does not look like Rembrandt, it is how he felt, in my opinion. In this painting, when he asked you for help, that suicidal moment, and reaching out to the viewer from 1661 to 2020 and saying, what would you do, or can you help me, or what should I do? You felt his pain, you felt his SOS, his cry for help, and that is what I wanted to communicate to you. And since we're talking about these times, I wanted to show you one more amazing thing before we end our journey. This is a painting. Have you seen this one before, Jeff?
Yes.
And this is my favorite
Not in
painting.
person,
Probably,
but I've seen it in reproduction.
yeah, probably, yes, Stockholm I have never been, but in reproduction as well for me. If anybody's watching in Stockholm, please say hello to us from us to this painting. This is my very, very favorite because I'm just going to move our pictures. Okay. Because this was the last painting found on Rembrandt's easel when he died. And it's amazing because it was unfinished, or so they think. The woman in the background was added later by somebody else. It really feels artificial. She shouldn't be there.
Right.
It was added probably by someone to help sell the painting, right? If you can make the story and the narrative a little bit more exciting, maybe the patron would want to hang it in their home. The subject is of religious nature, and you probably would have guessed the way this man is holding the baby and the way that the light is being radiated from the child, that it's a painting of Saint Simeon holding Christ. And Saint Simeon, according to a tradition, was prophesied by an angel that he will live until the day that he will hold Messiah in his hands, until he will see the Messiah, the Son of God, the continuation of the mystery. There were later traditions that told the story that he lived to a very old age. You won't find this in the Bible. In the Bible, it's a very short passage in St. John. But in later tradition, the story grew and grew to St. Simeon almost living to 200 years old. So old did he grow that he lost his eyesight and that he was blind, and the prophecy made no sense, because how could you see the Messiah if you're blind? And the story said that when he finally went to the temple and Christ was brought in to the temple, he held him up and he finally saw, and then he could pass. So what does this seeing mean? I began the tour by explaining to you that the name of Rembrandt, dim light, his whole work is dedicated to uncovering the eyes and how we see the light. And it gives me goosebumps to think that he painted the very last painting before he dies, didn't even finish it, about finally seeing. It's as if he's saying, I finally see, and now he can go to the next world. I wanted to end our experience. By the way, I promised you to say that the light was very important comment about the light. Both in this painting, it's very pertinent to this painting and to St. Bartholomew. The light no longer comes from a window. It comes from inside the people. In St. Bartholomew, it was coming from within his heart. That's how we got attracted to his shirt, to the pointing of the knife to the heart, almost like candlelight illuminating his face. And here it is from the child. Yes? Jeff?
Yeah, it's interesting. If you block out the image of the woman in the back where the light comes from a particular direction, it does change the way you see the light in the painting.
Yes. And one thing that I had my own revelation preparing for you, I note how St. Simeon is holding the baby. If anybody has a child, you don't hold a child like this. You see how he's holding him?
Mm-hmm.
The child would drop in about a second. But he holds him not as a child, but like a holy text. This is how you would hold the Torah, the Word of God. you would put a cloth between your hands so you wouldn't touch the book directly, with the words of God directly. And the illumination of the text is supposed to illuminate your soul. How does he see? Not with his eyes, with his hands. Just like Rembrandt would have touched his paintings and felt the paint with that impasto. So for the very end of our time together, I'd like to share one more quote that I reserved for you about the light and the dark. This is a detail. You can actually see, before I share the quote, that everything is, how you said, diffused here. No outlines. It's almost like a blind man painted it. Rembrandt was not blind. It's this idea of tactility by your soul, by your heart. You're no longer looking with your eyes. You're looking from within. Amazing transformation. And that light and dark, this is, I hope, will inspire you. The next quote is by Leonardo da Vinci. Love shows itself more in adversity than in prosperity, as light does, which shines most where the place is darkest. What he's saying is, if you're sad, if you're alone, if you're in a dark moment, like Saint Bartholomew, the light, the feeling of inspiration will come and shine its brightest. And I hope that today we brought a little joy to you with our Invisible Museum tour. We hope to do this on a regular basis. And I just come to the end to see if there's any comments from Jeff or anybody else. But I wanted to thank everyone for staying with us and for sharing and hopefully telling your friends about this.
Perfect, perfect. Well, you can unshare the screen, Zhenya, and then they can see us a little better, and we'll answer some of these questions. Yeah, that was amazing. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and these insights to these wonderful paintings.
My pleasure.
A real treat. I had the the wonderful pleasure of walking through the Getty with you, and it was such a enlightening experience. Your insights to the paintings are so unique and fascinating. It was a journey that I certainly enjoyed very much. And I'm glad that we're doing this together. This is fantastic, and that you asked me to be part of it.
Yeah, it's the funnest with the artists. You were full of commentary, and I know a lot of artists are watching us, and also my students are watching, and students all over the world. So the comments, your comments, Jeff, and others, is what makes it alive.
Yeah. I'm so fascinated by how much autobiographical information is within Rembrandt's work. That knowing when he painted something and what time of his life and what was happening just gives you insights to his mind and his thought processes, that he's communicating not just about the subject matter, but something about himself and his experience in the world. It's really, I think, important for artists out there today, where we have a little more freedom, obviously, than Rembrandt did in terms of what we can choose as subject matter. But this idea of exploring your existence in that way is still very much what we strive for.
And I think you're so right. For Rembrandt, what it seems, he wrote very little. He apparently wrote 9 letters. And when I first found out about it, I ran again to the Getty Library. You can find anything in Getty Library. It's an incredible resource, and they're very generous. And I found the 9 letters, and unfortunately, these were the 9 letters to his patrons saying, "You didn't pay me. Can you please send the payment?" And this is basically the only words of Rembrandt that we have. So how do we know what he felt or what he said or what he wanted to communicate? Is through his art. And unlike any other artist, he made more self-portraits than almost any other artist who ever lived. He painted a painting almost every year and made many etchings and drawings. And to me, what it signifies, not at all some kind of a selfishness or it's more that he's studying himself. He is the closest a human being that he could dissect. And if he can dissect himself, he can paint anything. Yes. So there's that idea of using yourself as a lab rat to understand humanity.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think you've nailed it right there. We're getting lots and lots of thank yous. People are telling you how wonderful. We have some people here that are saying that Bartholomew painting is going to stay with them forever now.
Good.
Brilliant,
Excellent.
enlightening. Yeah, yeah, lots of joy, lots of joy.
What I just wanted to maybe in closing say, and also please send us your questions. We'll continue answering remotely on Facebook, and we hope to also screen this on YouTube. You continue sharing this. But what I forgot to mention to you, since you brought up Saint Bartholomew, how it will stay with you, how I know that it's somewhat biographical and not just not related. When you look at Saint Bartholomew, he's thinking, he's putting his arm, then he puts his elbow, and his elbow seems to rest on an open book, probably a Bible or Word
Mhm.
of God, right? And right underneath it, he places his signature. It
Yeah,
is as if he is saying, I, like Saint Bartholomew, will paint how I see. And though his later style caused him to fall out of favor, he lost all of his students but one at some point, and he couldn't even sell his paintings. His paintings were returned to him. And the reason was he was very much ahead of his time. That impasto painting was not popular. It's what we love today. It was not popular at the time. His early student, continue to become more Rembrandt like Rembrandt, because he's painting these polished, licked, gorgeous paintings. The commissions go to his students, not to the master. So, and he's saying, I don't care. I will paint how I see is true. Just like St. Bartholomew would not renounce his faith, I stand by it as well.
I do. I see in that a lot of dimensions. I mean, you bring up the resolve in the painting to stick by it, but also that intense questioning. He's sacrificed so much, right? He's sacrificed his two loves, his children. He's sacrificing patronage, but he is resigned to the fate that are with him because of the commitment he's made to himself to stay true to his art. Yeah.
The most true paintings of all time. If there is truth in art, there it is. And I
Yes.
guess we'll leave you with that. And Jeff, I want to thank you and Anna, who's behind the scenes, monitoring the questions, making sure everything went smoothly. Royal Talents, Z Art Academy, please check us out. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. And same time, 2 weeks from today,
That's
we'll have our
right.
second episode and look for the announcements on the subject they're going to choose for that. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, Zhenya. And we will talk again soon. I can't wait. This was wonderful. Bye bye.